to wait to see, how does the labor data develop over the next 3 to 6 months before they make a final decision, right? I think that a January skip is very likely to get the January and February data before deciding what to do in March. Remember, we also get next week the CPI and retail sales reports, and those are incredibly important to, for forecasting what the first quarter is going to be like, given that that data tends to be a little bit more, not exactly forward-looking, but certainly helps with determining the trends of the health of the economy.
All right, Ira, thank you so much. Appreciate that. As always, Ira Jersey, Chief U.S. Interest Rate Strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence, calling in from our Princeton offices down there. S&P flat, absolutely unchanged on the day. The Dow's up 175, the Nasdaq's down 140. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg Intelligence. Good morning.
we have time to... Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Tech stocks right now, the laggards in this morning's trading. Shares of Apple down 1.4%. NVIDIA, always among the most active. That's down 1.6% right now. Earlier in the pre-market, it was higher on where the China plans to approve some of NVIDIA's H200 chips as soon as this quarter. Intel shares, they are down just about 2%, and we did get some economic data. This is labor productivity accelerating in the third quarter. That's all the strongest pace in about 2 years, so it does add evidence that efficiency gains are suppressing some of the inflationary pressure that we're seeing from wages. Right now, the S&P 500 unchanged, 69.21. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 189 points. NASDAQ Composite Index is up 133 points. Shares of Ford up over 4%. They plan to launch Level 3 autonomy in 2028. So this would allow drivers to take their eyes off the road while driving, which
Great.
A lot of the drivers I encountered, they'd be better off taking their eyes off the road.
Don't get me started.
But anyway, we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. As I repair my daughter's car, parked, somebody ran into it. It was a parked car.
Yeah.
Don't get me started.
The life of a parent, right?
Yes, never stops.
All right, let's talk about technology because John Tucker mentioned NVIDIA. It is the biggest decliner among the Mag 7 names, off by almost 2% this morning, even as China plans to approve some imports of the company's H200 chips as early as this quarter. That is according to Bloomberg reporting. Let's bring in our very own Caroline Hyde. She is host of B-Tech, but she is in Las Vegas right now attending the Consumer Electronics Show. Caroline, just put into context for us what this means for NVIDIA, because this is not the most high-end chips that NVIDIA makes, but it is something that was not available to China until fairly recently.
This is really significant for NVIDIA and its future revenue. Already they've articulated you could be getting $50 billion in the next year alone from this particular market. Remember, China is the biggest silicon market out there that they were trapped out of since 2022. They used to have 95% of the market in China. And now Jensen Huang has reminded us time and time again, he's basically got 0%. But he signaled earlier here at CES when he took to the stage on Monday and spoke with us on Tuesday that they are seeing real signals of demand from some of the key players. And according to our reporting, it does seem as though the likes of BYD and the likes of Alibaba are actually each won about 200,000 units of the H200s if they are indeed allowed. Now, we understand that the Chinese government could, as soon as the first quarter, sign off on some of these licenses that they would ultimately be getting to buy in what is the third generation behind the Vera Rubin, the latest, greatest architecture that Jensen Huang has been talking about here on stage. But it's interesting that there are caveats, of course, the same caveats that hit Micron and hit Apple, that you're not going to be able to sell into government-owned enterprises. You're not going to be able to sell into critical infrastructure. We don't really know what critical infrastructure exactly means, but certainly not into the military. So there are limitations, but it's still a massive potential market and big upside in terms of revenue for the company.
And Caroline, I'd love to get your thoughts. Like, when I was at CES, Chinese attendance was crazy. They were everywhere. They really came over to bring all their products, see all the other products. Huge market for global tech. Is that still the case?
It is. It is. In fact, we had a big sort of China hawk on the show yesterday, Palmer Luckey, and he's saying how surprised he is that still the Chinese dominate an awful lot of stands here at CES, because they make the latest, greatest technology, of course, for a consumer at a price point that the consumer wants. Look, we know how incredibly powerful they are in drones, particularly for consumers. We know the limitations the US government is trying to put on the buying of drones, particularly by the military, that are made by Chinese. They see it as a national security threat. But look, when I wander around this stage and I'm looking at the floor, look, just next door to us are companies that are Chinese that are making little toys that speak to you in the generative AI manner that are likely to be your companion of the future or a children's companion of the future. They're still intertwined with almost all of the consumer technology here. Look, you try and strip out the supply chain. It's incredibly hard.
Yep.
So much is still made in China. And look, that's why the pressure point has been put on big tech, small tech, anyone. Look at Apple really in the crosshairs of how much of its manufacturing is made in China.
Well, speaking of big U.S. companies, what are the U.S. companies that are at CES really featuring this year? What's the one thing that they're not pushing, but they're highlighting and they're showcasing?
Robots. I mean, across the board, it is humanoid robots. But everyone is saying that they're almost there, on the cusp of. But look, they're not going to be in your home